Nsisan was left standing alone. As she watched the family go inside, she felt a deep sense of loneliness. She often felt like an outsider, even though they were her family. She thought about her situation and felt sad that she didn't have a family like Mrs. Ajuri and her daughters. Her mother had passed away, leaving her to face the world alone, and she sometimes felt like no one truly understood her. In a quiet village nestled along the river banks in Rivers State, Nigeria, there lived a young girl named Nsisan. Life had not been kind to her. Nsisan had lost both of her parents when she was just a little girl. With no relatives willing to care for her, she had been sent to live with her only known family member, her auntie, Mrs. Ajuri. Mrs. Ajuri, a robust woman with a sharp tongue, had two daughters of her own, Osila and Onene, who were close in age but completely different in temperament from Nsisan. Osila and Onene were known throughout the village for being lazy, rude, and highly disrespectful. Traits that were the exact opposite of their mother's stern, hard-working reputation. Mrs. Ajuri had worked hard to raise her daughters, but despite her efforts, they turned out to be spoiled and irresponsible. They never lifted a finger to help around the house and spent their days lazing around, leaving all the hard work for Nsisan to do. In contrast, Nsisan, though just a teenager, had already developed the discipline and resilience of someone much older. She was hardworking, respectful, and humble. The villagers often spoke kindly of her, admiring how such a young girl could carry such burdens without complaints. Nsisan did all the household chores from morning till night. Every single day, she would wake up long before dawn, while the birds were still asleep, to fetch water from the nearby stream. After filling the water drums, she would return home, clean the house, and cook for the family. All of this was done before her cousins even stirred from their beds. The neighbors who passed by would often see Nsisan busy at work, sweeping the compound, scrubbing the floors, or washing clothes, while Osila and Onene idled away their time, chatting and laughing with friends or watching the clouds roll by. The neighbors pitied Nsisan, but no one dared to speak up because Mrs. Ajuri was known to be a strict and no-nonsense woman. Despite her dedication and hard work, Nsisan was treated harshly by her auntie and cousins. Mrs. Ajuri never showed her any kindness or appreciation. Instead, she was quick to find fault with everything Nsisan did. If the food was not to her taste, it was Nsisan's fault. If the house was not cleaned to her exciting standards, Nsisan would bear the brunt of her fury. And if Osila or Onene misplaced something, it was always Nsisan who got the blame. Osila and Onene, though lazy, took great pleasure in bossing Nsisan around. They would demand that she fetch things for them, clean up after them, and even carry their laundry to the riverbank while they played with their friends. Nsisan never protested. She simply carried out their orders, knowing that any resistance would only lead to more punishment from her auntie. One hot afternoon, while the sun was high in the sky and the air was thick with heat, Mrs. Ajuri returned home after spending the day visiting a friend in the neighboring village. She had left the house early in the morning and had expected that by the time she returned, everything would be in order. The house spotless, the dishes washed, and food ready. But to her great annoyance, when she entered the kitchen, she found that the breakfast dishes were still dirty and piled up in the sink. Her anger flared up instantly. Mrs. Ajuri was not the kind of woman who tolerated laziness, and seeing the unwashed dishes made her blood boil. She stormed outside of the kitchen and called out in her loudest voice, "Nsisan! Nsisan! Where are you?" Nsisan, who had just returned from the stream, heard her auntie's voice thundering through the house. She quickly placed the water pot she had been carrying on her head down by the side of the house and ran towards the kitchen. Her heart raced as she approached, knowing that she was about to be scolded for something, although she had no idea what she had done wrong this time. "Yes, auntie," Mrs. Ann said breathlessly as she entered the kitchen. Mrs. Ajuri stood with her hands on her hips, her face twisted in anger. "Why haven't you washed the dishes yet?" she demanded, pointing at the dirty plates in the sink. "I'm sorry, auntie," Mrs. Ann began to explain, her voice low and respectful. "I went to the stream to fetch water and collect firewood for cooking. I've just returned." But before Mrs. Ann could finish her explanation, Mrs. Ajuri's hand came down hard across her cheek, delivering a stinging slap that took Mrs. Ann by surprise. The slap was so forceful that Mrs. Ann's vision blurred momentarily, and tears welled up in her eyes. "You lazy girl," Mrs. Ajuri shouted. "I left this house for just a few hours, and you can't even wash simple plates. What have you been doing all day? Do you think this house runs itself?" "I'm sorry, auntie," Mrs. Ann repeated, her voice trembling as she fought too hard to hold back her tears. She knew that no amount of explanation could calm her auntie's anger. This wasn't the first time she had been scolded for something she hadn't done. "Sorry for yourself," Mrs. Ajuri spat. "Now get out of my sight and finish all your chores before I come back." Mrs. Ann nodded, tears now streaming down her face. She turned and hurried out of the kitchen, her heart heavy with sadness and pain. She had done nothing wrong, yet she was being punished again. As she walked back to the backyard to continue her walk, her cousins Osila and Onene, who had been sitting under the mango tree the entire time, noticed her tear-streaked face. They exchanged glances and smiled. "Look at her, always crying like a baby," Onene said with a sneer. "Just because of a simple slap mommy gave her." "Ha ha 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 ha, don't mind her," Osila replied, flipping her long braided hair over her shoulders. "She's so lazy. That's why mommy is always shouting at her. If she were hardworking like us, she wouldn't be getting into trouble all the time." Both girls laughed loudly, enjoying their little moments of teasing as they watched Mrs. Ann walk past them. Mrs. Ann wiped her tears and continued walking, determined to finish her chores despite the pain in her heart. She had no choice but to endure. This was her life now, her lonely, difficult life with her auntie and cousins. But deep down, Mrs. Ann held on to the hope that one day things would get better. And so, as the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows across the village, Mrs. Ann continued her walk, her hands busy but her heart heavy with sorrow. She had no one to turn to, no one to comfort her, but she was strong. She had to be, for there was no other way to survive. After leaving the kitchen, Mrs. Ann walked slowly towards her small dimly lit room, her feet dragging as if weighed down by the sadness in her heart. The harsh words from her auntie, Mrs. Ajuri, and the cruel mockery of her cousins, Osila and Onene, still echoed in her mind like a bitter melody that refused to fade. As she stepped inside, the sight of the simple wooden bed she had slept in for years greeted her. Nsisa sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the coarse mat that served as her bedding beneath her. She wrapped her arms around her knees and stared blankly at the floor. Her thoughts drifted back to her parents, the loving and caring mother and father she had lost so early in life. They had always been there for her, making sure she was happy and protected. The warmth of their love still lingered in her memory like the comforting embrace of a blanket on a cold night. She could almost hear her mother's gentle laughter and her father's strong, reassuring voice as he called her his little princess. Mrs. Ann missed them terribly. The ache in her heart grew heavier with each passing day, and she often found herself wondering why life had to be so hard. Why had she been left alone in the world with no one to love her? As these thoughts ran through her mind, tears began to well up in her eyes, and soon they flowed down her cheeks. She cried quietly, the sadness pouring out like a river that had long been dammed up. As she wiped her tears with the back of her hand, Nsisan heard a knock at the door. Knock, knock, knock. The sound startled her, and she quickly straightened up, trying to clear her voice and hide her tears. Yes, who is that? Come in, she said, her voice shaking slightly as she hurriedly dried her face with her hands. The door creaked open, and standing there was Osila, her older cousin, holding a bundle of clothes in her arms. Without even looking at Nsisan properly, she tossed the clothes onto the bed. Here are my clothes. Wash them for me, Osila commanded, her tone as cold as ever. Before Nsisan could respond, Onene, the younger cousin, entered the room, also carrying a pile of clothes. She dropped them on the bed beside Osila's bundle and gave Nsisan a stern look. And here are mine too, she added with a smile. Make sure you wash them neatly and let them dry quickly, Onene continued, her voice filled with the authority of someone who felt they were better than Nsisan. I don't want you spending the whole day just washing clothes. Do it fast. Nsisan swallowed the lump forming in her throat and looked down at the large piles of clothes. There were so many of them, and the thought of the long hours of work ahead made her heart sink even further. She had been working all day, and now, just when she thought she could rest, more work awaited her. Her body ached, her spirit tired, and she felt as if she could collapse right there on the floor. But she knew better than to refuse or protest. For a moment, Nsisan gathered all her courage and asked quietly, Why are you both treating me like a maid? I am your sister. Her words were soft, almost pleading, but they were met with harsh laughter from Osila. Who is your sister? Osila mocked, turning to look at Onene with amusement. This is my only sister, she said, pointing at Onene, who chuckled in agreement. Nsisan's heart ached even more. But I'm your cousin, she replied, her voice breaking slightly as she tried to remind them of the bond they shared through blood. Onene, showing no sign of compassion, shook her head and laughed even louder. Cousin my foot. We don't see you as a cousin. You are just a servant here, Onene said, her eyes glinting with cruelty. Then she turned to Osila. Sister, let's go and leave her with the clothes. She has a lot of work to do, Onene said, laughing as they both left the room, their mocking voices echoing down the hallway. Nsisan sat there in silence for a while, looking at the piles of clothes dumped on her bed. She felt so alone, so unloved. The pain of being treated like an outsider in the house she now called home was almost unbearable. She had no one to turn to, no one who cared. Her cousins saw her as nothing more than a servant, and her auntie's harsh treatment was a daily reminder that she was not welcomed. But what could she do? She had nowhere else to go. She had no choice but to endure. With a deep sigh, Nsisan gathered the clothes and carried them outside to the backyard where the washing basin was. She filled it with water from the large drum and began scrubbing the clothes one by one. The sun had started to set by the time she finished. Her arms ached, her back was sore, and her eyes stung from the soap. She spread the clothes outside on the line to dry and dragged her tired body back to her room. As she lay on her small bed, her body heavy with exhaustion, Nsisan let her thoughts wander. She wished for a better life, for a family that loved her. She wished for her parents to return, but deep down, she knew that wasn't possible. Slowly, as the darkness of the night deepened, Nsisan drifted off to sleep, her dreams offering her a temporary escape from the harshness of reality. In her dream, Nsisan found herself in a place unlike anything she had ever seen. It was bright and beautiful, filled with a calm and peaceful atmosphere. The air smelled sweet, like the fragrance of freshly bloomed flowers after the rain. Everything seemed perfect, almost magical. As she looked around, wondering where she was, Nsisan suddenly saw her mother standing in front of her, smiling gently. "Mommy!" Nsisan cried out in joy, her heart leaping with happiness. She rushed towards her mother, eager to feel her warm embrace again. But before she could reach her, her mother raised her hand gently to stop her. "My daughter, don't come close," her mother said softly. her voice filled with love and tenderness. "You need to be brave, my child. Bear everything that is happening now. Very soon, you will not go through these pains anymore." Mrs. stood still, listening carefully to her mother's words, her heart filled with wonder. "Omi, I miss you," she whispered, her eyes wide with emotion. Her mother continued, "You will live in a royal palace. You will eat good food, dress in royal clothes, and dine with kings, queens, princes, and princesses. Be strong, my daughter. Your time is coming," her mother said, her voice fading as her image began to disappear. "No, mommy, don't go," Mrs. called out, reaching towards her mother, but it was too late. Her mother had vanished, leaving Mrs. standing alone in the dream world. Mrs. woke up with a start, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment, she lay still, her mind trying to process the dream. Slowly, a smile spread across her face as she remembered her mother's words. The dream had filled her with hope and a new sense of purpose. She believed that her mother had spoken to her from the spirit world, bringing her a message of hope for a better future. As she lay there, the exhaustion of the day seemed to melt away, replaced by a feeling of lightness. Her mother's promise echoed in her mind. "You will live in a royal palace." Mrs. clung to those words, allowing them to fill her heart with happiness. Perhaps life wouldn't always be this hard. Perhaps there was something better awaiting her. As Mrs. sat up on the bed, still lost in thought, she heard another knock at the door. She quickly composed herself and called out, "Yes, who is it?" The door opened, and Osila stepped in, followed by Onene. This time, they had no clothes in their hands. Instead, they were wearing excited expressions on their faces. "Mrs. come and teach us how to dance," Osila said, her voice filled with an unusual excitement. Mrs. looked at them, surprised by the sudden request. "Dance? Dance for what?" she asked, not understanding why they would ask her to teach them how to dance. Onene's face lit up with excitement as she answered, "Dance for the prince. The best dancer will marry the prince." Mrs. blinked, trying to process what she had just heard. Could this be the opportunity her mother had spoken about? Mrs. had always been known in her village for her exceptional dancing skills. From the time she was a little girl, her feet seemed to have a rhythm all their own. Why there was a festival, a celebration, or even a small gathering, people would gather just to watch her dance. Her movements were graceful and captivating, with each step so smooth and precise that it seemed effortless. The way she swayed her hips, twirled and tapped her feet on the ground could make anyone cheer. It was as if the music flowed through her body, guiding her every movement. Her dancing was more than just a skill. It was a gift that no one in the village could match. Mrs. danced with a joy that could light up the faces of everyone who watched her. And that's why people admired her. Even though she was an orphan living with her harsh aunt, her dancing brought her happiness and a sense of freedom. One evening, as the sun began to set and the golden light faded into the cool embrace of dusk, Mrs. found herself in the yard, showing her cousins Osila and Onene how to dance. The air was fresh, with a soft breeze blowing through the trees, making their leaves sway gently, almost as if they were moving in tune with incessant steps. It was the perfect time for dancing practice, and the soft rhythm of drums playing in the distance made the atmosphere even more lively. "Nsisan, this dance step is not easy at all," Osila complained, trying hard to mimic Nsisan's graceful movements. Her face was crunched up in frustration as she struggled to follow along. Nsisan, ever patient, smiled and laughed gently. "You need to keep practicing, Osila. If you want to win the prince's heart, you will have to learn these moves well. Bend your waist a little more and shake it. Just follow my movements." Osila sighed but nodded, determined to improve. "Okay, I'll try again," Onene chimed in, concentrating on her steps as she tried to imitate Nsisan's fluid motions. Nsisan, always the teacher, started dancing again, her body moving effortlessly. Her feet tapped the ground lightly, her hips swayed in perfect rhythm, and her arms floated through the air like they were part of the music itself. Osila and Onene watched closely, trying their best to copy her, but no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't quite get it right. Nsisan's talent was just too natural, too extraordinary. As the three girls continued practicing, a group of village maidens suddenly appeared at the entrance of the compound. Their excited voices echoed through the air as they called out for Nsisan. "Nsisan, come out!" the maidens shouted, their voices full of excitement and energy. Startled by the sudden commotion, Osila stepped forward, annoyance written all over her face. Hey, what's all the noise for?" she snapped. "You girls should stop right there. What do you want?" One of the maidens, Lale, stepped forward hesitantly, her eyes showing a mix of urgency and respect. She spoke politely, trying to calm Osila's irritation. "Sorry, Osila. We didn't mean to intrude like this, but we really need Nsisan's help." Osila raised an eyebrow, her suspicion growing. "Help for what?" she asked, crossing her arms and tapping her foot impatiently. Lara cleared her throat nervously before continuing. "We need her to teach us how to dance," she explained, her voice trembling slightly. "Everyone knows that Nsisan is the best dancer in the whole village. There is no one better." Onene, who had been standing beside Osila, stepped in, her voice sharp and impatient. "And so what? If she is the best dancer, why are you making so much noise? Just say what you came here for and leave." Lale took a deep breath and continued, her voice more confident this time. "As you know, the crown prince will be returning from abroad next week. The king, the Igwe, announced that all the maidens of the village must prepare to dance for the prince. The prince will choose his bride from among the best dancers, and we want Nsisan to teach us so we can have a chance." When Nsisan heard this, her heart leaped with excitement. Dancing for the prince? It sounded like a dream. She loved dancing more than anything, and the idea of helping her fellow maidens learn to dance filled her with joy. Without hesitation, Nsisan stepped forward, her face bright with a warm smile. "I would love to help you girls. I will teach you how to dance." But before Lale could express her gratitude, Osila stepped in, her face twisted with anger. "No!" she snapped, her voice sharp and unforgiving. "You won't help anyone." The sudden harshness in Osila's voice caught everyone off guard. Lale and the other maidens looked confused and frightened. "But why?" Lale asked, her voice trembling. "We only want to learn." Osila glared at her, her arms still crossed tightly over her chest. "I don't care what you want. If you know what is good for you, leave this compound now before I teach you girls a lesson you will never forget." The other maiden stepped back, startled by Osila's sudden anger. "Please, we are not here to cause trouble," one of the maiden pleaded, her voice filled with fear. "We just need help." Seeing the tension rise, Onene stepped forward to back her sister. Her eyes flashed with annoyance as she pointed at the girls. "Oh, so you are not here for trouble? Well, you are about to find some," Onene said, her voice laced with sarcasm. "You think you can just walk in here and take Nsisan away to help you? Think again." The village maiden didn't know what to do. They had only come to ask for Nsisan's help, but now it seemed like they had caused a bigger problem. They looked at each other, unsure whether to stand their ground or retreat. Just then, Osila and Onene exchanged glances, and with a huff of frustration, they turned and stormed back into the house, leaving Nsisan standing there, feeling torn between her desire to help and her fear of disobeying her cousins. The other maidens stood in silence for a moment, unsure of what to do next. Nsisan, seeing the disappointment on their faces, felt her heart sink. She knew she could help them. She wanted to help them, but she also knew that defying Osila and Onene would only bring more trouble for herself. She glanced at the house, where her cousins had disappeared, and then back at the girls who had come seeking for her help. As Osila and Onene stormed into the house, they grabbed a cutlass each, the blades making a sharp scraping sound against the door frame as they prepared to chase away the other maidens. The clang of metals reverberated through the yard, loud enough to send a chill down anyone's spine. The girls outside heard the noise, and a wave of panic swept over them like a gust of cold wind. "Run! They have a cutlass!" Lale screamed, her voice high-pitched and trembling with fear. The sight of the cutlass gleaming in the evening light was enough to send the maidens scattering in all directions. Without a second thought, they turned and sprinted from their lives, their feet pounding against the ground as they dashed away, their hearts racing with terror. "Villagers, help! They want to kill us!" one of the maidens shouted, her voice full of panic as they fled from the compound, hoping to find safety. Osila stood at the entrance of the house, laughing widely as she watched the chaos unfold. "Look at them! You girls could have just stayed quiet and asked nicely instead of babbling," she called out, her laughter echoing in the evening air. "Don't mind them, sister. They are just foolish. Let's get back to dancing," Onene added, her heart still racing with the thrill of the moment. Osila, still smirking from the excitement, turned back towards Nsisan. Her expression grew serious as she pointed a finger at her younger cousin. "And as for you, Nsisan, if you know what is good for you, don't teach those girls how to dance. You hear me?" she warned, her tone cold and threatening. Nsisan, feeling a surge of bravery, stood her ground. She looked directly at Osila and asked calmly, "But why did you chase them away with a cutlass? That's not right. They only wanted help." Onene, standing next to her sister, gave a mocking laugh. "Oh, now Nsisa wants to teach us about what is right and what is wrong. Since when did you become our teacher?" she scoffed, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Osila waved her hand dismissively. "Don't pay her any mind. Onene, let's just continue with the dance lessons. We need to get these steps perfect before the prince arrives." Nsisa nodded, deciding to let the matter drop for now. She resumed showing her cousins the dance steps, her body moving gracefully and effortlessly, as if she was born to dance. Her feet tapped the ground in perfect rhythm, her hips swayed fluidly, and her arms moved gracefully through the air. Osila and Onene tried their best to keep up, following her movements as closely as they could, but they still struggled to match Nsisan's natural grace. The three of them practiced together, turning, swaying, and repeating the steps over and over. Nsisan patiently corrected their mistakes, helping them improve with each try. Slowly, Osila and Onene began to get the hang of it, their movements becoming smoother with each passing minute. Just as they were starting to feel more confident, Mrs. Ajuri walked into the yard. She had been inside the house, but now she stood at the edge of the yard, watching them with a frown on her face. Her eyes scanned the scene before her, taking the sight of her daughters dancing while Nsisan led the way. "Nsisan, what are you doing out here?" Mrs. Ajuri called out, her voice sharp with concern. "Have you finished tidying up the house?" Nsisan froze for a moment, slightly embarrassed that she hadn't completed her chores. "No, ma," she replied quietly, bowing her head. Mrs. Ajuri's frown deepened. "Then, what are you still doing here? You know you have responsibilities," she scolded, placing her hands on her hips. But before Nsisan could respond, Osila jumped in to explain. "Mom, she's teaching us how to dance. The king announced that the prince is coming back from abroad next week, and all the maidens need to prepare to dance for him. Nsisan is helping us to learn the dance steps so we can impress him." Mrs. Ajuri's stern expression immediately softened, and her eyes lit up with excitement. "Oh, my daughters, is that so?" she said, her tone changing to one of delight. "I'm so happy to hear that. I know the prince will surely choose one of you because my daughters are the most beautiful in the whole village. Nsisan, make sure you teach them well. They must impress the prince," she added, her voice full of enthusiasm. "Okay, auntie," Nsisan replied, feeling encouraged by Mrs. Ajuri's sudden support. She was happy to help her cousins prepare, even if they didn't always treat her kindly. After a few more minutes of dancing, Osila stretched her arms and sighed. "I think we've done enough for today. Let's take a break and continue tomorrow. We've been practicing since morning after all. Yeah, I'm tired too. Onene agreed, wiping the sweat from her forehead. Nsisa nodded, feeling the tiredness in her own body as well. Alright, let's continue tomorrow, she said. As her cousins went inside the house to rest, Nsisa stayed back for a moment to catch her breath. The yard was quiet now, the only sound being the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. The sky had turned to a deep shade of orange as the sun set, casting a warm glow over the village. Nsisa felt a sense of peace wash over her as she looked around, grateful for the calm after such a chaotic day. But there was still work to be done. Nsisa headed back into the house to complete her chores. She carefully cleaned each room, tidied up the furniture, and made sure everything was in order. Then she washed the dishes, fetched water, and even scrubbed the floor, making sure the house was spotless. Despite the hard work, Nsisa didn't complain. She took pride in doing her task well, even if no one else appreciated her efforts. Meanwhile, throughout the village, excitement was building. Every maiden in the community was busy preparing for the prince's return. They practiced their dances, sewed their finest clothes, and adorned themselves with beautiful accessories. Everyone wanted to catch the prince's eyes, and the anticipation grew with each passing day. As Nsisa finished her chores and prepared to rest for the night, she couldn't help but feel proud of the role she was playing, even if she wouldn't be the one dancing for the prince. She was happy to help her cousins prepare. Her gift for dancing was something she cherished, as she hoped that by teaching Osila and Onene, they would have a chance to shine in front of the prince and make their mother proud. The stars twinkled in the night sky as Nsisa lay down to sleep. The village was quiet, the sounds of crickets filling the air. Nsisa took a deep breath, her thought drifting to the days ahead. She was excited to continue the dance lessons, but a small worry tugged at her heart. What would happen when the prince finally arrived? In the village, the excitement was growing every day. The upcoming visit of the crown prince had turned the entire village into a hub of activity. Every family had high hopes, and every mother dreamt of the day her daughter would be chosen to become the prince's bride. For the villagers, this was not just a marriage, it was an opportunity that could change the fate of a family forever. The mothers believed that if the prince picked their daughter, their family would be lifted into royalty, gaining respect and honor throughout the land. The village market became more crowded as the days went by. Mothers could be seen rushing from store to store, buying the finest and most expensive items for their daughters. Earrings, necklaces, bracelets, and wrappers of the highest quality were purchased to make sure the maidens looked stunning when the prince arrived. The market buzzed with chatter about the upcoming event, with every mother praising her daughter's beauty and grace. Mrs. Ajuri, Osila and Onone's mother, was no different from the other mothers in the village. She had great pride in her daughters and never missed an opportunity to tell others how beautiful and talented they were. Whenever she had the chance, she would boast to her neighbors, "My daughters are the most beautiful maidens in the entire village. I'm certain that the prince will choose one of them to be his bride. After all, how could he resist?" Her confidence in Osila and Onene was unwavering. Every day, she encouraged them to prepare for the important day when the prince would return to the village. She made sure they practiced their dance steps, reminding them that the prince's heart could be won through grace, beauty, and charm. One evening, after a long day of watching her daughter practice the dance, Mrs. Ajuri called them into the house. The sun had set, and the soft glow of the moonlight filled the yard, creating a calm and peaceful atmosphere. But Mrs. Ajuri was full of energy and excitement. She had something important to share with her daughters, something she believed would help them win the prince's heart. "My daughters," she began, her voice filled with enthusiasm, "do you know the secret to capturing the prince's heart on the day he returns?" Osila and Onone leaned in, eager to hear what their mother had to say. "You must dance very well," Mrs. Ajuri continued. her eyes sparkling with excitement. But it's not just about the dancing. You must move with grace, shake your body in the most elegant way, and above all, you must smile as you dance. Your smile will capture the prince's attention and make him notice you among all other maidens. A beautiful smile is what will make the difference. Osila and Onone nodded in agreement, absorbing their mother's advice. They knew she was right. The prince wouldn't just be looking for the best dancer. He would be looking for the maiden who stood out, the one who could win his heart with her charm and grace. Mama, we will do exactly that, Osila said confidently. We won't lose the prince to anyone else. You know he is the king's only son, and when the king dies, the prince will take over the throne. If I marry him, I will become the queen. Mrs. Ajuru smiled proudly, pleased with Osila's confidence. Yes, my daughter, that's exactly right. And I want the prince to choose one of you. You are both beautiful and talented, and with a little more practice, you will be perfect on the day he arrives. Onone, not wanting to be left out of the conversation, added with a grin, Mama, you don't need to worry. I'm already the prince's bride in my mind. I know he will choose me because I'm the most beautiful girl in the village. Mrs. Ajuri chuckled, her heart swelling with pride. She loved how confident her daughters were. She truly believed that one of them would soon become the queen. However, Osila's smile faded slightly as a thought crossed her mind. But Mama, we haven't perfected our dance steps yet, she said, her voice tinged with worry. What if we don't dance well enough to impress the prince? Mrs. Ajuri paused for a moment, considering her daughter's concerns. Then her face brightened with an idea. Don't worry, my daughters. Mrs. Ann, we continue teaching you. She is the best dancer in the village. And with her help, you will learn all the moves perfectly. Just keep practicing and everything will go well. Osila and Onene felt reassured by their mother's words. They knew that Nsisan's dancing skill were unmatched, and with her guardian, they felt confident that they would be ready for the prince's arrival. Mama, you are right, Onene agreed. With Nsisan helping us, we will be the best dancers in the whole village. Feeling encouraged, the two sisters made a promise to themselves to practice harder and perfect the dance. They believed that with their beauty, charm, and dancing skills, the prince would surely choose one of them. They also trusted that Nsisan, with her natural gift for dancing, would teach them everything they needed to know. As the days passed, the excitement in the village continued to grow. The mothers prepared for their daughters, and the maidens practiced their dances with determination. Everyone was focused on one thing, impressing the prince and winning his heart. For Osila and Onene, the pressure was high, but they felt confident knowing that Nsisa was there to guide them. They believed that with enough hard work and patience, they would be ready when the time came. They wanted to make their mother proud, and more importantly, secure their place as the future queen of the village. One afternoon, Mrs. Ajuri came back from the market feeling very happy. She had bought new wrappers and jewelry for her two daughters in preparation for the big dance festival that was coming soon. She knew how excited they were about the event, and she wanted them to look their best. As she entered the compound, she saw her daughters and Nsisa practicing the dance moves outside. They were laughing and dancing together, filled with joy. Mrs. Ajuri watched them with pride, feeling glad that her daughters were learning so quickly. She smiled and praised them, telling them how proud she was of their dancing skill. I am proud of my daughters, she thought. They are learning so fast, and I am happy to see them enjoying themselves. After a moment, Mrs. Ajuri called out to her daughters to come and see the wrappers she had bought for them. She was excited to show them the beautiful materials and jewelry she had carefully chosen. The girls rushed over to her, eager to see what their mother had brought back from the market. They were delighted when they saw the bright colors and shiny jewelry. They admired the wrappers, holding them up and imagining how they would look when they wore them for the dance festival. The two sisters felt grateful for their mother's kindness. They expressed their appreciation, letting their mother know how much they loved the new item. Mrs. Ajuri felt even more content seeing the joy on her daughters' faces. She then remembered that she had not eaten since returning from the market and asked Nsisan, who had been watching them from a distance, if there was any food. Nsisan, always eager to help, quickly answered that she had prepared porridge jam for everyone. Hearing this, Mrs. Ajuli smiled and invited her daughters to join her inside so they could eat together. The three of them left the compound and went inside the house, chatting happily about the upcoming dance festival. But outside, Nsisan was left standing alone. As she watched the family go inside, she felt a deep sense of loneliness. She often felt like an outsider, even though they were her family. She thought about her situation and felt sad that she didn't have a family like Mrs. Ajuri and her daughters. Her mother had passed away, leaving her to face the world alone, and she sometimes felt like no one truly understood her. Nsisan's thoughts turned to the prince of Eleme village. She had often heard stories about him, and like many of the other young maidens in the village, she dreamed of what it might be like to be noticed by him. But unlike her friends and her cousins, Nsisan didn't believe she would ever catch the prince's eye. She felt that because she was an orphan and didn't have the same opportunities as the others, she wasn't worthy of such attention. She believed her poverty and simple life made her invincible to someone as important as the prince. However, Nsisan didn't let her sadness hold her back for too long. She reminded herself that she had dreams of her own. One day, she hoped to study abroad and become a medical doctor. It was a dream she held close to her heart, and she believed that if she worked hard enough, it could come true. Even though she faced many challenges, Nsisan was determined to achieve her goals. She knew that she had to stay focused and keep working hard to rebuild a better life. Meanwhile, the prince of Elema village had finally returned to the community after a long time away. His arrival had been eagerly anticipated, and the news of his return spread quickly throughout the village. Everyone was excited, and many of the villagers made their way to the palace to welcome him back. The palace grounds were soon filled with people, all hoping to catch a glimpse of the prince. The air buzzed with excitement as the villagers gathered, waiting for him to make his appearance. The young maidens of the village were especially eager to be noticed by the prince. They had dressed in their finest clothes and were trying their best to move to the front of the crowd, hoping to catch his attention. However, the palace guards were there to keep order. They had been instructed to ensure that only the elders of the village were allowed to sit at the front. The guards made sure the young maiden stayed back and didn't cause too much commotion. Despite their best efforts, the girls were told to step back and allow the elders to take their places in the front. The maidens were disappointed, but they reluctantly obeyed, stepping back as the guards instructed. While the other girls were busy trying to get closer to the prince, Nsisan stood quietly at the back, watching the scene unfold. She didn't try to push her way to the front like the others. Deep down, she believed that the prince wouldn't notice someone like her, and she didn't want to embarrass herself by trying. As the crowd grew larger, Nsisan's aunt spotted her standing at the back. Her aunt was not pleased to see Nsisan at the palace, and she quickly went over to her, grabbing Nsisan by the ear. She scolded her and told her to return home immediately. Nsisan didn't argue. She lowered her head and quietly left the palace grounds, feeling even more isolated than before. With the excitement of the prince's return filling the village, Nsisan's thoughts were filled with both hope and doubt. She had big dreams, but she also felt the weight of her reality pressing down on her. Still, Nsisan refused to give up. She knew that she had to keep working hard and believing in herself if she was ever going to achieve her dreams. Though she felt out of place, and uncertain about her future. Sisan held onto the hope that one day she would have the chance to make a better life for herself. And with that thought, she made her way back home, determined to keep pushing forward, no matter how difficult things were. The entire village was filled with excitement as the long-awaited day arrived. The return of the Crown Prince of Emere was a significant event for everyone. The villagers gathered around the palace square, waiting eagerly for the royal family to address them. Colorful banners were hung, and the air was filled with the scent of delicious food being prepared for the celebration. The atmosphere buzzed with joy and anticipation as people chatted among themselves about the prince's return after many years of studying abroad. Finally, the time came for the king and his son to address the crowd. The drums sounded, and everyone quieted down, their eyes focused on the royal platform. The king, a tall man with a dignified presence, stood before his people, his voice carrying clearly across the square. "My people," the king began, his voice commanding attention, "I am happy to welcome my son, Prince Emere, back home. He has spent many years in a foreign land, learning and growing. But as the saying goes, there is no place like home. Now he has returned to his community, and he is ready to help us grow and develop with the knowledge he has gained. Let us all welcome him." As soon as the king finished speaking, the villagers erupted in cheers. They clapped and shouted with joy, their faces beaming with happiness. "You're welcome, Your Royal Majesty," they called out in unison, their voices blending into a wave of excitement that spread throughout the crowd. Prince Emere, standing beside his father, smiled warmly as he stepped forward to speak. The villagers immediately quieted down again, eager to hear what the young prince had to say. His eyes swept across the crowd, filled with gratitude for their warm welcome. "Thank you all for your kind words and your warm welcome," Prince Emere began, his voice steady and confident. "I have returned to this community not just to live here, but to help develop it. Just as my father said, we will work together to make our village stronger. Together, we will build better roads, bring electricity to every home, and ensure that our children have access to good schools. I am excited to work with you all." The villagers were filled with admiration for the young prince's vision and commitment. The elders of the village, dressed in their traditional attire, came forward to greet him. Each one shook the prince's hand, offering blessings and words of encouragement. Some even hugged him warmly, happy to see the young man they had known as a boy now returned as a leader. It was a joyful moment, and the entire palace was filled with celebration. After the speeches, the feast began. Large pots of food were prepared, and everyone enjoyed a variety of delicious meals. There were jollof rice, pounded yam, egusi soup, and many other traditional dishes. Drinks flowed freely, and the villagers ate to their heart's content. Laughter and lively conversations filled the air as they celebrated the prince's return. By the time the feast was over, everyone felt satisfied and full, their hearts happy from the day's event. As the villagers returned to their homes that evening, the excitement did not die down. In every household, people continued to talk about the prince's return and the wonderful things he had promised. Everyone looked forward to the next big event, the maiden dance, where the prince would choose his bride. Osila and Onene lay on their beds, talking about the day's event. They were both excited about the return of the prince and the upcoming dance festival. "Did you see how he spoke?" Osila said, her eyes shining with excitement. "He's really wise, and he's so handsome. I can't believe he's finally back in the village." Onene, who was lying on the bed next to her sister, smiled dreamily. "Yes, sister, I'm so happy to see him too. He has grown into such a fine man, and he spoke with so much confidence and wisdom. I can't wait for the maiden dance." Osila nodded, and in 2 days, We will all go to the palace again for the announcement of the maiden dance, she said, her excitement growing. Yes, sister, Onene agreed, letting out a small yawn. But for now, I'm feeling sleepy. It's been a long day and we should go to bed. Tomorrow is another day to prepare. Good night, Onene, Osila replied, still lost in her thoughts about the prince. Soon, the two sisters drifted off to sleep, their dreams filled with visions of dancing for the prince and the hope of becoming his bride. The next morning, as the sun rose gently over the village, Prince Emere was already awake and sitting with his mother, the queen, inside the palace. He had been thinking a lot about the traditions of the village, especially the maiden dance. There was something on his mind that he wanted to discuss with her. Mom, Prince Emere began, his voice thoughtful. I want to take a walk around the village today. The queen, surprised by her son's request, looked at him. Why, my son? She asked curiously. I just want to see the big stream, Mama. It's been long I saw our stream. Prince Emere replied with a smile. I haven't seen it since I left for my studies, and I want to reconnect with the land. The queen smiled, understanding his desire to reconnect with his home. That's fine, my son, she said warmly, but I will send one of the palace guards to go with you and protect you. Prince Emere nodded in agreement, but there was something else weighing on his mind. After a moment of hesitation, he spoke again, his tone more serious. Mom, there is something else I have been thinking about. The queen, sensing her son's shift in mood, put down her work again and gave him her full attention. What is it, my son? She asked gently. Prince Emere sighed. I don't think the idea of choosing my bride through the maiden dance is a good one, he admitted. I want to choose my bride myself, not because of some tradition. I want it to be someone I love, someone I connect with. The queen looked at her son with understanding. My son, she said softly, I know you may feel this way, but the maiden dance is a tradition in our land. Every crown prince from our royal family has chosen his bride on the day of the dance. It's been that way for generations. Prince Emere looked down, his brow furrowed in thought. But Mom, it doesn't feel right, he said quietly. The queen reached out and gently touched his hand. That is how your father chose me, she said with a smile, her eyes filled with fond memories. And we have had a wonderful life together. Prince Emere smiled back at his mother, feeling reassured by her words. You're a wonderful woman, Mom, he said, his heart full of respect. Dad really made a wise choice. With that, the conversation ended, but the thoughts in Prince Emere's heart were still unsettled. He knew that the tradition of the maiden dance was important to his family and his people. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he wanted something different for himself. As the day of the maiden dance approached, Prince Emere knew he had much to think about. It was the evening after Prince Emere had expressed his concerns to his mother. The thought of choosing a wife from the upcoming dance still weighed heavily on his mind. He could not shake off the worries he had had about selecting a bride so quickly, especially without knowing much about her. So once again, he made his way to the queen's chamber, hoping to talk things through. As he approached, the queen looked up from where she was seated, already sensing her son's unease. Mom, the prince called out softly. Yes, my son, the queen replied warmly, inviting him to speak. Prince Emere took a deep breath before continuing. Mom, I'm still worried about this whole dance competition thing. What if I don't choose wisely? He asked, his voice full of concern. The queen smiled patiently. It won't happen, my son. The gods of our land will guide you to the right one on that day, she assured him. But Mom, it's just one dance. How can I choose a bride from that? We won't know each other. I'll be marrying a stranger. What if I choose someone who isn't right for me? Prince Emere said, expressing his deepest fears. The queen remained calm. My son, you cannot choose the wrong woman. The tradition has always worked. You will find the right one, she said confidently. Prince Emere wasn't convinced. It's possible to choose wrongly. Mom, I need to know more about her. I'm the crown prince and soon I'll be the king. I need a wise and virtuous woman, someone who can help me lead the people and offer good advice. How can I find someone like that in just a dance? He asked, his voice filled with worry. The queen nodded in understanding. Yes, I understand your concerns. But think about it, my son. Your father chose me in the same way. And look how happy we are. The same way your father found a good woman, you will do too. The gods never make mistakes, she said, her voice gentle but firm. Feeling somehow comforted by his mother's words, Prince Emere sighed. Okay, Mom, I guess I'll trust the gods then, he said, though he was still unsure. You will see, everything will work out, the queen assured him with a smile. All right, Mom, I'll be leaving now, Prince Emere said, feeling a little more at ease after the conversation. Deciding to clear his mind, the prince thought it would be a good idea to take another walk around the village. He enjoyed seeing the places he had missed while studying abroad. As he stood up to leave, the queen called for 2 guards to accompany him, making sure he would be safe during his stroll. The guards led him around the village, showing him places he had once known but hadn't seen in years. As they walked through the village paths, the prince saw many people going about their daily activities. Everywhere he went, the villagers smiled and greeted him respectfully. He was their prince, and they admired him. During his walk, he came across a group of young maidens, all busy with various chores. The moment they noticed the prince, their eyes widened with admiration. They were all eager to be noticed by him. One of the maidens, Chua, smiled brightly at him, while the others whispered among themselves, clearly excited to see him. The prince acknowledged their greetings, but kept walking. He was polite, but he was still deep in thought about the upcoming maiden dance. As the prince and the guards made their way back towards the palace, they passed by the market area, where people were finishing their business for the day. It was here that Prince Emere encountered a young maiden named Nsisan. She was carrying a basket, clearly on her way home from the market, when she saw the prince approaching. Her heart skipped a beat, but she quickly greeted him with respect. Your Royal Majesty, good evening to you, Nsisan said humbly, bowing slightly. Prince Emere, surprised by her calmness and humility, smiled warmly. Good evening, dear. How are you? He responded, his voice kind and gentle. Nsisan, though shy, kept her composure. I'm fine, my prince, she replied. The prince took a moment to observe her. She was beautiful, and something about her humbleness caught his attention. You are both beautiful and humble, Prince Emere said, clearly impressed. What is your name? My prince, my name is Nsisan, she answered softly. One of the guards, recognizing her, quickly added, My prince, she's our village dancer. The prince's eyes lit up with interest. Wow, that's nice, he said. Then, looking at the basket she was carrying, he asked, It seems like you're just coming back from the market. Yes, my prince, Nsisan responded, and I need to hurry home quickly. The prince nodded, but couldn't help feeling drawn to her. Okay, he said, but I would love to see you again. Before Prince Emere could say anything more, Nsisan, shy and unsure of what to do, quickly ran off, disappearing down the path towards her home. The prince watched her go, slightly amused by her shyness, but also intrigued by her modesty and grace. Prince Emere had been feeling different lately. There was something that occupied his mind, and that something was a person. Nsisan. He couldn't stop thinking about her. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face. Even when he opened them, it was as though her image still lingered in his thoughts. He wasn't sure how this happened or when exactly it had started. But all he knew was that Nsisan was in his heart, and she wasn't leaving anytime soon. Sitting quietly in the royal chamber, he was lost in thought about her. What was she doing in that moment? Was she thinking about him too? Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. "Who is that? Come in," Prince Emere called out, trying to shake off the feelings he had for a moment. The door opened, and a palace maid walked in, bowing her head respectfully. "My prince, dinner is served," she informed him. "Okay, thank you," Prince Emere responded, standing up from where he had been seated. He followed the maid out of his chamber and made his way to the dining room. When he got there, his parents, the king and queen, were already waiting for him. As was the custom in the palace, they ate together as a family. After the meal, everyone retreated to their usual activities, but Prince Emere and his father stayed behind in the sitting room to have a conversation. The king turned to his son with a serious expression. "Son, tomorrow is the day you must choose your bride," he said, his voice filled with both excitement and expectation. Prince Emere felt a small smile tug out at the corner of his lips. "Wow, Dad, I'm so excited about that. I can't wait," he replied. "I'm excited too, my son," the king said, a broad smile spreading across his face. "You know, my days are counting, and I need to see my grandchildren before I leave this world. I pray that the gods of our land give you a good wife." "Definitely, Dad. I will choose a good woman tomorrow," Prince Emere assured his father. The queen, who had been quietly observing, was surprised by her son's cheerful attitude. Just a few hours ago, he had seemed so worried about the whole idea of choosing a wife from a dancing competition. But now, he seemed completely at ease, and she couldn't quite figure out what had changed. "Okay, son, now about the project we discussed yesterday," the king began, shifting the conversation to something else. "Yes, Dad," Prince Emere replied. "I will arrange for the highway maintenance operatives to start working on constructing the road as soon as possible." "That's wonderful, my son," the king said, nodding in approval. "And Dad, I will also begin the construction on the new school building so that the children in our community can get a proper education," Prince Emere added. The king beamed with pride at his son's dedication. "You've made me proud, my son, to bring electricity to our community, to build good schools and roads. These are things that will benefit everyone. I'm so happy." "There is more, Dad," Prince Emere continued. "I believe we should also introduce modern dressing to our people. Women will wear gowns, shirts and blouses instead of tying wrappers all the time, and men will wear t-shirts and trousers." The king looked even more impressed. "You have great ideas, my son," he said. "You are thinking about the future of our community. I believe you'll be a great king one day." "Thank you, Dad," Prince Emere replied, feeling a sense of pride swell in his chest. "But for now, I think I will get some rest." "Me too, my son," the king said, rising from his seat. "We have a big day tomorrow." Prince Emere retired to his chambers, but as he lay on his bed, sleep did not come easily. His mind wandered back to Nsisan. He knew that tomorrow was the day he was supposed to choose a bride, and every girl in the village would be eager to catch his attention. But his heart was already set on Nsisan, even though he wasn't sure if she would be there. The next day arrived, and it was the day of the maiden dance, the event where Prince Emere would choose his bride. It was a tradition in their community for the crown prince to select his future wife from the young women who participated in the dance. The entire village gathered at the palace for the occasion. Filled with excitement and curiosity, everyone wanted to know who the crown prince would choose. Meanwhile, in a house on the edge of the village, Nsisan was busy with her chores. She had wanted to go to the maiden dance like every other girl in the village. But Ajuri, her aunt, who she lived with, had forbidden her from going. "Don't you dare go near the palace today," Mrs. Ajuri had warned sternly that morning. "You will stay here and do all the house chores. Do you understand?" Nsisan had nodded obediently, even though her heart sank at the thought of missing such an important event. She had hoped that perhaps, just perhaps, Prince Emere might notice her if she had been there. But now, it seemed that her dreams of being near the palace were just that, dreams. With a heavy heart, Nsisan continued with her chores, while the rest of the village gathered at the palace, eager to see who Prince would choose. Everyone had gathered at the palace for the grand event. It was a special day for the entire village because Prince Emere was going to choose his bride. The crowd was full of excitement, with all the young maidens in the village participating in the dance. Among them were Osile and Onene. The dance was going smoothly, and every maiden was trying their best to catch Prince Emere's attention. Each girl danced to the rhythm of the drums, hoping that she would be the one to win the prince's heart. But Prince Emere was not paying much attention to the dances. His mind was elsewhere. He was busy scanning the crowd, looking for someone, Nsisan. His heart had already chosen her, even though she wasn't part of the dance competition. He couldn't explain it, but he knew she was the one for him. As the dance continued, he found himself growing impatient, waiting to see her. Meanwhile, Onene, who was getting ready to take her turn in the dance, noticed something was wrong. Her beads were incomplete. She became upset, knowing that her costume had to be perfect if she wanted to stand out and win the prince's favor. She felt desperate, not wanting to miss her chance. She sent a little girl who was standing nearby to rush back to their house and ask Nsisan to bring the missing bead. The little girl ran as fast as she could to deliver the message, but she was in such a hurry to return to the palace that she didn't wait for Nsisan to give her the bead. She just passed on the message and quickly ran off, eager not to miss any part of the dance. Nsisan, always dutiful and caring, decided to bring the bead herself. She knew how important the dance was to her cousin Onene and didn't want to let her down. So she rushed to the palace, carrying the bead, hoping to make it in time. The moment Nsisan arrived at the palace, everything changed. As soon as Prince Emere saw her, his heart skipped a beat. Without thinking, he stood up and pointed towards her. "She's my bride," Prince Emere declared loudly, his voice echoing across the palace grounds. Nsisan was completely shocked. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she looked around, unsure if the prince had really chosen her. She had only come to deliver the bead. Yet, here she was, being declared as the prince's bride. The announcement took everyone by surprise. Mrs. Ajuri, who had always treated Nsisan poorly, was in complete disbelief. She had never imagined that the prince would choose someone like Nsisan, an orphan, a poor girl, to be his bride. The other maidens, who had worked so hard to impress the prince with their dances, began whispering to each other. "Am I not beautiful?" one maiden asked, feeling confused and disappointed. What could make the prince choose an orphan, a poor girl? Another maiden questioned, unable to hide her surprise. But there was one person who was not surprised, the chief priest. He smiled as if he had known all along that this would happen. He stepped forward and addressed the prince. "She's the chosen one," the chief priest said, his voice calm and full of wisdom. "My prince, you have made the right choice. Her sorrows have ended. Cry no more, Nsisan. My prince, take your bride to the king, so that he may bless you both." Prince Emere reached for Nsisan's hand. Gently, he led her to where the king and queen were seated. They knelt before them, waiting for the king's blessing. The king smiled warmly at the couple. He placed his hands on their heads and began to speak. "I bless you both," he said, his voice full of love and pride. "Your marriage will be peaceful and filled with happiness and joy. You will bear children, and you both shall rule this community with wisdom." The crowd gathered at the palace echoed at the king's words. "Ise!" they shouted, a traditional way of affirming the king's blessing. Prince Emere and Nsisan rose to their feet. The prince turned to face the crowd and spoke from his heart. "The first day I met her, I met a supporter, a woman with wisdom, a humble woman. She has all the qualities of a queen, and she is brave. I love you, Nsisan, and I will always make you happy." The crowd burst into applause. The village men began to sing and beat their drums, and everyone danced. Prince Emere and Nsisan danced together, their smiles wide and their hearts full of joy. It was a celebration that no one would forget. As the occasion came to an end, the villagers began to return to their homes, talking excitedly about what had just happened. Mrs. Ajuri, however, stayed behind, still trying to understand how Nsisan had ended up at the palace. She turned to her daughters, Osila and Onene, to ask what had happened. Onene explained everything. She told her mother how she had sent the little girl to ask Nsisan for the missing bead, and how Nsisan had come to the palace to deliver it. Osila and Onene, both disappointed with how things had turned out, began to blame their mother for how they had been raised. "Mom, you see," Onene said, her voice full of frustration, "you frustrated us. You made us hate Nsisan. And now look, she is the one who had become the prince's bride. You trained her to be a good girl and hardworking, but you kept pampering us. You never let us do any house chores." Mrs. Ajuri was taken aback by her daughter's words. "Onene, are you really telling me this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Yes, Mom," Onene replied firmly. "You never loved us enough to teach us the right things." Mrs. Ajuri shook her head in disbelief. "I love you girls," she said softly. "You both are my daughters." But Osila, who had been silent up till now, spoke up. "Mama, you say you love us, but you didn't show it. If you really loved us, you would have taught us how to love Nsisan too. And you would have made sure we learned how to be responsible. Sister, let's go." With that, Osila and Onene walked away, leaving their mother standing there alone and crying. "My daughters, wait, please forgive me," Mrs. Ajuri cried after them. "Remember, I'm still your mother." But her daughters didn't stop, and Mrs. Ajuri was left to reflect on the mistakes she had made. As for Prince Emere and Nsisan, their love grew stronger each day. Prince Emere cherished Nsisan with all his heart. He treated her with care and kindness, making sure that she was always happy. He never let her shed a tear. They lived a life full of love and joy, and in time, they were blessed with 3 beautiful children. The king and queen eventually passed away, and Prince Emere and Nsisan gave them a grand and befitting burial. After that, Prince Emere was crowned king, and Nsisan became the queen. Together, they ruled the community with wisdom, just as the king had blessed them to do. Their reign was peaceful, and they were loved by all the people. And so, the story of Prince Emere and Queen Nsisan came to a happy and fulfilling ending, with love, joy, and wisdom guiding their path. The most important lesson in this story is that being kind, humble, and hardworking can bring great blessings. Nsisan was a poor orphan, but because she was good-hearted and never gave up, she became the queen. This shows that how we treat others and the good things we do matter more than the riches or beauty. Always be good, and good things will come to you. And with that, my dear friends, our story comes to a close. But remember, the magic of storytelling lives on, waiting to whisk us away on new adventures, where the wonders of imagination know no bounds. Goodbye for now, and may your dreams be filled with joy, wonder, and endless possibility. Thank you so much for watching. Please kindly comment, like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting stories.